You flip a light switch, you scroll your phone in bed, you lock your door and fall asleep without a second thought. But 2,000 years ago, a Roman soldier standing in the freezing darkness on the edge of the known world didn't have that luxury. After the sun went down, survival wasn't guaranteed. The night belonged to something else. The Roman legions are famous for their daytime glory, marching in perfect formation, conquering cities, building roads that still exist today. But here's what no one talks about. What happened after dark, when the trumpets stopped, when the generals went silent, when 20,000 men huddled inside a temporary wooden fortress, surrounded by absolute wilderness? That's when the real test began. Imagine this. You're a young legionary, maybe 19 years old. You've marched 20 miles that day in full armor. Your feet are blistered, your back aches. The sun has just dropped behind the hills of Germania or Britannia, and now the camp goes dead quiet, not because the day is over, but because the most dangerous shift of your life is about to start. Roman military camps, called castra, were masterpieces of paranoid efficiency. Every single night, no matter where they were, legions built a full fortified camp from scratch. Ditches, wooden walls, watchtowers, gates, streets laid out in perfect grids. They did this whether they were stopping for one night or 1 year. Because Rome knew something we've forgotten. Darkness is when you're most vulnerable. But the construction was only the beginning. Once the camp was sealed, the vigils took over, the night watch. These weren't casual guards leaning on spears. This was a rotating system of brutal precision. Soldiers were divided into 4 shifts called vigiliae. Each shift lasted 3 hours. And if you missed your turn, or worse, if you fell asleep on duty, the punishment wasn't a warning, it was death. Think about this. A Roman centurion would walk the camp perimeter at random hours, completely silent, checking every guard post. If he found you asleep, you were beaten to death by your own unit, with clubs, in front of everyone. The Roman historian Polybius documented this. It wasn't rare. It was policy, because one sleeping guard could mean the massacre of an entire legion. So no one slept easy. Even off duty, soldiers stayed half awake in their leather tents, listening, waiting. The slightest sound from outside the walls, a branch snapping, a dog barking in the distance, could send the entire camp into silent alarm. And beyond those walls, in the forests of Germania or the hills of Britannia, there were tribes who knew the Romans were there, watching, waiting for one mistake. But here's what's fascinating. The Romans didn't just sit in fear. They used the night. While most of the camp rested in tense silence, others worked by firelight. And this is where we see the humanity behind the machine. Soldiers would gather in small groups near controlled fires, just bright enough to see their hands. And they'd begin their real work, sharpening the gladius, that short, brutal sword that had conquered half the world. Every night it needed care. A dull blade in close combat meant death. So they'd sit in the cold, running whetstones along the edges, over and over in rhythmic scrapes that echoed through the camp. It was meditative. It was survival. They repaired armor, leather straps that had cracked during the day's march, metal buckles that had bent, sandals that were falling apart. Roman soldiers were required to be their own maintenance crew. There were no backup supplies, no Amazon delivery. If your gear failed, you fixed it yourself or you died wearing broken equipment. And then, something unexpected. They wrote letters. Archaeologists have found hundreds of wooden tablets, called tabulae, at Roman frontier sites like Vindolanda in northern Britain. These weren't official reports, they were personal. A soldier named Octavius writing to his brother, asking for more socks because the British cold was unbearable. Another begging his family to send him money because his pay was delayed. Some were love letters, others were just loneliness carved into wood. These men were often stationed 1,000 miles from home. They signed up for 25 years of service. Most would never see their families again. So at night, by firelight, they'd scratch words onto thin pieces of birch or oak, seal them with wax, and send them back on the next supply convoy, hoping someone still remembered them. But all of this, the sharpening, the repairs, the letters, happened under one condition: silence. Absolute silence, because sound carried, and the enemy was always listening. Now picture the watchtower, a wooden platform, maybe 30 feet high, freezing cold, open to the wind. You're standing there alone for 3 hours. No phone, no light except the small fire below and the stars above. And in front of you, nothing but darkness, forests, hills, rivers. And somewhere out there, people who want you dead. Roman guards weren't just watching for armies. They were watching for movement, for the glint of a weapon in the moonlight, for the smell of smoke that didn't belong. Wild animals, wolves, bears, would circle the camps. Some tribes used the darkness to probe the defenses. They'd send one man, just to test, to see if the Romans were awake. If he made it close without a sound, they'd know. The camp was vulnerable, so the guards kept fires burning on the towers. Not for warmth, for sight. Fire makes shadows move. It keeps your eyes adjusted. It tells the darkness that someone is still awake, still watching. And psychologically, it was the only thing keeping some men from breaking. Because here's the twist. Modern sleep researchers have studied Roman military schedules, and they've concluded something shocking. Most Roman soldiers on campaign were chronically sleep-deprived. The constant rotation, the noise, the fear, it created a state of hypervigilance that we now recognize as a trauma response. These men weren't just disciplined, they were surviving on adrenaline, routine, and the fear of letting their brothers down. The empire didn't fall because of weak soldiers. It fell because this system, this brutal, sleepless, perfectly organized machine, was unsustainable. You can only ask humans to live like this for so long before something breaks. So tonight, when you turn off the lights and close your eyes in safety, remember this. There was a time when night was the enemy, when darkness required discipline, fire, and a blade within arm's reach. We've forgotten what it took to survive the hours between dusk and dawn. But for the men who held the borders of Rome, every single night was a war, and most of them fought it alone, in silence, in the cold, waiting for a sunrise that wasn't guaranteed.